saying is there's a totally different dynamic with Rosen.
Director, you used a term just now for the gentlelady from California. You said we are in the process of. Actually, no, you said we are, and you said it in the present tense. It's fair to characterize that what you're really saying is we are now in the process of protecting that which has not been previously protected. In other words, since you use the present tense, I'm assuming that before this became very public, protections that will be in effect in the future were not in effect.
Well, we have protection of all of our investigations. Some investigations are protected more than others.
But Director, I just want to hold you to the explicits of your word, if I may. You said it in the present tense. So, is it fair? Yes or no? Is it fair for me to assume that there are additional efforts now underway that will be implemented?
Yes.
Thank you. At some time in the past, was James Rosen a subject of an investigation as to criminal activity?
Not to my knowledge.
Is he now a suspect in a criminal investigation?
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you. So a warrant or any other document naming him as a suspect of a criminal investigation would be false.
Well, I don't think there's such a warrant out there.
Okay, so any kind of documentation that alleged that he was involved in that would be a false statement. I just want to follow up on what Mr. Bach has said that, you know...
I think I know where you're going. I see...
Will you get me there?
We're not all the way there. The colloquy and questions that you ask, I'm comfortable with when you go and say that conduct described in a particular entity which could or could not be subject to ultimately prosecution.
But it's fair to say he wasn't a suspect, and we'll let the words of some document speak for itself. Today, are you using all necessary and available resources to apprehend those people responsible for the murders in Benghazi?
Yes.
To your knowledge, are the CIA, NSA, and other appropriate overseas assets being used to try to find those responsible and bring them to justice?
Yes.
Is there a reason for it? Can you explain to us, and this is a little longer than the usual answer, I'm sure, how it could be that we've got videos of them, we've got knowledge of who many of these people are, in some cases by name, and yet we haven't found one of them in Libya or some other country? Isn't that unusual to have such a cold record as far as we know today?
Let me explain in a couple ways. Yes, it is unusual to have such a cold record. As I articulated before, this is a unique situation. We've had embassy attacks before. We've had our colleagues in law enforcement and the government helping us. There is no government to help us in Libya. We don't have colleagues we can go to, and so it is unique. But
you have had access to the site and to people there, and you do have the ability to get into Benghazi if absolutely necessary, either you or agents on our behalf.
If absolutely necessary, but it's a very hostile territory, as you can understand. Nonetheless, we have video. We have something there to work with, and I can tell you that we have been working with it, and that quite obviously individuals who may have participated, against whom we may have evidence, whether it be video or otherwise, we are pursuing.
Okay, just two more quick questions. In your lifetime of law enforcement, is it a practice that you believe is appropriate to, when you have information and transcripts and other collected data, to selectively make some of it available in order to facilitate both public and witness cooperation? In other words, do you put out certain information, and conversely, do you retain certain information? In other words, you don't put out an entire transcript or deposition, you don't put out all the evidence you have, but you do put some of it out as a matter of course in investigations in order to get people pointed. For example, you put out a picture of somebody in the case of Benghazi, and yet you're retaining, I'm sure, some information that only you know.
You know, we are making use of newer media on Facebook and the like in the course of our investigation in Benghazi. You can go on our website and find stills from the videos
Selectively picked while others were retained.
Picked because we want people to come forward. We did the same thing in Boston. The way we were able to identify the two responsible there was to focus in on identify them, leaving the crime at the scene, and identifying them afterwards and publicizing their pictures.
Lastly, the people responsible for Benghazi, to our knowledge, are not U.S. persons. Therefore, if you knew the location of them, wouldn't they be eligible for a presidential-ordered drone strike, no matter what country they were in?
Time of the gentleman has expired. The director will be allowed to answer the question.
By others than I, who are more familiar with the ins and outs of the regime for undertaking such activity.
But to your knowledge, that would be consistent with other drone strikes ordered by the president.
Again, I'm not that familiar with other drone strikes, and I'd have to try to defer from answering that particular question on lack of knowledge and probably legal ability as well.
Okay. Well, with the chairman's indulgence for 10 seconds, Director, I want to thank you for your long years of service and for all that you've done for America. This is always a tough place to come, but you're always welcome. Thank you, sir.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Let me start by saying, Director, we have interacted with each other for the past 11 years, and I want to thank you for your service. You are particularly one that I admire, having graduated from the University of Virginia School of Law. You're obviously a very wise man. Fellow alum, let me thank you, and I know that we'll show no bias this morning, but I do want to thank you for your service. One of the points that seemingly has not penetrated into this committee is the enormous hit that the FBI is going to take on sequestration. You mentioned $550 million, $700 million in 2014. The other was 2013, a loss of 2,200. I think you said 1,400. That is going to be somewhat devastating. Is that not correct?
Yes.
And the FBI has had a vigorous influence on the civil rights investigations of America. Yesterday was the 50th anniversary of the death of Medgar Evers. Would that impact a variety of responsibilities that the FBI has, including civil rights enforcement?
I can't go that far because let me tell you that when we get faced with cuts, we prioritize. We would not cut counterterrorism. We would not cut counterintelligence. We would not cut cyber. The two principal criminal programs are public corruption and civil rights. They will be.
So you would be tight, but you'd be tight, but you would try to do it, but you'd be tight in other areas.
We'd be tight, and as we go down that list of priorities, we will be cutting, and the support that you get in those investigations would be cut.
And that's very important. Let me just ask you about gun legislation. You are a lawyer and a strong advocate, I know, of the Constitution, Bill of Rights. Would a gun storage bill or universal background check, when I say that, requiring people to store their guns, universal background check, would that seemingly infringe on the Second Amendment, just on its face?
And the one thing I am not is a constitutional lawyer. And I understand the thrust of the question. And I understand the...
Would good laws help make us safer, possibly?
We can always do more.
Thank you very much. Let me move to this question of the emails and the various public discussion, which I think is good. Do you think that we could have a significant release of significant construction or interpretation of Section 501 decisions that could be declassified in a manner consistent with the protection of national security, intelligence sources, methods, and properly classified and sensitive information, meaning that the decisions of the FISA court be declassified, keeping in mind under the restraints of national security, classified intelligence sources, etc.? Could that occur?
I have to defer to the Department of Justice on that because that relates to the protocols that are set up not just by the Department of Justice but by the FISA court as well.
And so opinions of the FISA court, you think disclosing them, you as an investigator, if it was protecting other classified, would not be open to the public and be reasonable?
Well, I would think that, no, there are absolutely, in those opinions, are matters that absolutely should remain classified.
But if they would keep that classified, others could be released.
I don't know that for a fact.
With respect to Section 501, it speaks to tangible things that are part of this investigation. Do you think Section 501, that is the issue of application for order of investigation, could be narrowed somewhat?
I'm just not familiar with what you're talking about, ma'am.
This-
501.
It's 215, codified 501, Section 215.
Oh, 215. I'm sorry. Could you?
Whether or not that could be codified, narrowed a little bit from its broadness, which is how we've gotten to where we are today.
I think there can be a discussion as to the scope of 215, understanding that the purpose of it, but also the impact on privacy. And
Well, let me ask these two quick questions. And time is that.
Sorry.
Do you think what we have done over the past, what we've been disclosed, is so broad that we undermine what we need to do by not narrowly focusing? And then lastly, with respect to the Boston Marathon case, I want to quickly get to that. Have you in this investigation determined why the dots were not connected as they looked at the two perpetrators' travel overseas, coming back? Have you found the smoking gun on that issue? But can you go first to the question of narrowing this broad trolling, it seems to be, and still get where you need it to go?
Well, I wouldn't call it broad trolling, needless to say. I would see it appropriate to the goal that you have, and to the extent that you narrow it, you narrow the dots that are available. You will narrow the dots that are available. That may be that dot that prevents the next Boston. On the Boston case, I think we did a very thorough job when he came to our attention. I do think there could have been better exchange of information, particularly by the Russians earlier on, that may have helped. And there were other things in terms of alerting the travel that we are fixing. But even if we fix that, even if that had been fixed prior to the Boston bombing, I do not think it would have stopped it. But I go back to the point: yes, you can narrow, yes, you can draw a balance, but you are going to minimize the dots.
Let me thank the gentleman again for his service. Thank you. I yield back. Thank you again for your